Picture an isolated, tightly controlled society. Before the explosion of global trade, the average European lived in a world governed by strict feudal boundaries. For centuries, understanding the physical world meant consulting ancient religious texts. Truth was a top-down decree handed out by church authority, heavily guarded and absolutely final. Then came the Crusades. While armies clashed over Jerusalem, merchants and scholars were quietly trading something far more valuable: Arabic translations of lost Greek philosophy, advanced mathematics, and early chemistry. This massive influx of data flowed straight into the independent trading hubs of Italy and Germany. Flush with cash and newly exposed to foreign ideas, the urban merchant class began questioning the rigid social hierarchies that kept them near the bottom. Attention pivoted from the divine down to the physical. Thinkers started examining human proportions, geometry, and earthly life. Humanism emerged, the idea that individual intelligence and human potential were worthy of deep, meticulous study. Once people realized they could independently observe and measure their own bodies and societies, the psychological barrier cracked. They were ready to start measuring the physical laws of nature itself. In 1543, Nicolaus Copernicus published mathematical proof that the Earth orbits the Sun. Heliocentrism directly challenged the Church's teaching that humanity sat stationary at the center of God's creation. Decades later, Galileo Galilei took this from a mathematical theory to a physical reality. Using an improved telescope he built in 1609, he looked up and gathered hard visual evidence. He mapped craters and mountains across the lunar surface. The heavens were supposed to be made of perfect, smooth, unchanging ether. Instead, they were jagged, rocky, and completely ordinary. He applied this same demand for physical proof to gravity. By dropping weights from the Leaning Tower of Pisa, he demonstrated that objects fall at the exact same rate, regardless of mass, outright disproving thousands of years of accepted philosophy. Isaac Newton eventually took these isolated observations of falling weights and orbiting planets and bound them together. He proved that a single calculable force, gravity, governed both an apple dropping from a tree and the Earth circling the Sun. By successfully mapping out universal mathematical laws, these thinkers proved that reality could be understood through observation, bypassing the establishment's traditional monopoly on knowledge. This diagram outlines the core engine of the Renaissance, the scientific method, a three-stage cycle of observation, repetition, and deduction. It generated objective facts, but extracting a fact is useless without sharing it. The medieval manuscript system created a physical bottleneck, tightly controlling information. Johannes Gutenberg's mechanical printing press shattered that bottleneck. By the mid-1400s, it enabled the mass production of text, triggering a decentralized explosion of literature and scientific data across Europe. When Martin Luther wrote his 95 Theses criticizing church corruption, printers rapidly reproduced the document, bypassing local authorities and igniting the Protestant Reformation across the continent. Equip a society with a systematic method to discover the truth and a machine to perfectly replicate and distribute it, and intellectual independence becomes mathematically impossible to contain. As the Church's total intellectual dominance fractured, secular monarchs quickly seized the resulting power vacuum. They centralized authority, giving rise to fiercely competitive national states, defined by shared language and borders. These ambitious new nations immediately weaponized the era's scientific breakthroughs. Advanced navigation instruments and more accurate map-making allowed state-sponsored fleets to cross oceans, driven by a hyper-competitive push to hoard global wealth. This aggressive expansion eventually brought European powers to the shores of India. The subsequent colonial rules systematically dismantled local textile and manufacturing industries to redirect vast wealth back to European capitals. Yet, to extract these resources efficiently, colonial powers had to physically hardwire their new technologies into the subcontinent, installing massive networks of railways, telegraph lines, and postal systems. Alongside the steel tracks came universities teaching Western scientific principles and the English language. This inadvertently supplied a new generation of Indian thinkers with the exact intellectual tools needed to launch their own social reform and independence movements. What began as a shift in how a few scholars viewed the stars compounded into a total system upgrade for human civilization. By replacing absolute dogma with observable reason, The Renaissance engineered both the immense brilliance and the fierce brutality of the modern world.